Everyone. Welcome to our wonderful event today, celebrating our beautiful planet on Earth Day. It definitely is a day that should be recognized 365 days a year. But really, this Earth Week has been incredible, celebrating our beautiful planet and the incredible people helping to preserve it during YPO's Earth Week 2022 series, centered around the theme of regenerating our Earth. And in this series, we will and have introduced you to organizations and incredible individuals undertaking game-changing sustainability efforts, and the younger generations who have been committed to preserving and shaping the future of our planet. Just to set the tone, throughout the nexus of humanity and nature, we have been coexisting in harmony for thousands of years. But in the last 50 years, we've abolished wildlife numbers globally by 68%. The increase in human population, the turmoil that overconsumption creates, and climate change's impact will devastate our planet. In this conversation, we will explore the tools, partnerships, and the role of business to scale solutions that can help us turn the tide towards a healthier planet. And today with me, I have the pleasure of welcoming Kaddu Sebunya, who is the CEO of the African Wildlife Foundation. Now, Kaddu has 25 years worth of government relations, conservation, and international development experience. Kaddu is a distinguished in the industry as a leader at all levels, from community level engagement through the highest levels of government in Africa, Europe, China, and the Americas. He has worked with Oxfam UK, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, USA Peace Corps, Conservation International, and Solomar International. Kaddu is also one of the most visible and respected voices for wildlife, our wild lands, conservation, and sustainable development on the African continent. He is honored to advise the Pan-African institutions and several African states on implementation of the African Union Vision 2063, and has become a frequent and sought-after speaker in Africa and across the globe. This experience is complemented by a bachelor's degree in social sciences and 2 master's degrees, one being a Master's of Arts degree in Law, Policy, and Diplomacy, as well as a Master of Science in Sustainable Resource Management and Policy, with special focus on human development and government at the Imperial College in London. Today, I am humbled to share that Kaddu is a friend, a mentor, and an ally in the work that we are doing to preserve these incredible, beautiful wild spaces that we all dearly love, where Earth Day comes as a celebration for all the good that we can do towards securing and solving our global challenges as a collective. Now, to introduce myself, Dimitri Syrris, I am the founder and CEO of Baotree, as well as the YNG representative on the Planet Action Network. Now, I'm extremely honored to be wearing my Baotree hat today, which infuses my love for conservation, community, culture, and commerce. Growing up in South Africa, I had the privilege of traveling across the continent and witnessing the systems that govern our natural spaces, where the biggest realization of these systems may deter most, but doing the hard things is within my DNA, and YPO YNG is a network that has supported me in realizing these dreams through mentorship, investment, and advisory board members that are members of this phenomenal network. And just to provide context on Baotree, we were born to solve the problem of simple digital data collection at the grassroots or community level. We are a software as a service data management system that provides a simple data dashboard, as well as a mobile application to collect, verify, and manage data. And uniquely, our system includes the participation of community members in their own development projects, as well as building a new way to create trust, transparency, and accountability, really with a goal to support the organizations working to support people and planet in just reducing operational costs and money and the expenditures that come with this hard work in the field. So without further ado, welcome to our event today, and I'm going to pass the mic to Kaddu to set the table and bring us into the session.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Good evening, everyone from rainy Nairobi here in Kenya, and happy Earth Day. To set the ball rolling, really, as Dimitri has just said, I work for the African Wildlife Foundation. We have been in existence for 60 years. But 3 years ago, we reached a point when we decided that the way we did conservation needed to change based on the results we saw from the sector and the external factors that were driving the impacts on biodiversity and wildlife on the African continent. We could not continue doing the same things and expecting different results. Data does not lie. Consistently, Africa has been losing species. Dimitri has said 65%. Elephants, for example, 35,000 per year. Rhino extinction in the wild in many countries. Pangolins, the most trafficked African mammal in the world. So our response for the last decades, and everyone in conservation in Africa, has been more protection, more training of rangers, more guns for protecting wildlife, more management plans for national parks, and asking for more funding. But how does this end? So we concluded that the future of African wildlife and lands depends on how Africans, as citizens of the continent, will link the conservation agenda to the aspirations and mindsets driving change on the continent. Our proposition or theory of change was that if African people own, benefit from, and value wildlife and wildlands, then people will make cultural and economic choices that do not degrade the environment, leading to better conditions for improved planning, social investment, and capacity. And this will enable effective protection of wildlife and resulting in a thriving wildlife population and secured habitat. So therefore, we need to set ourselves and ensure that Africans at all levels of society need to be supported to understand, innovate, lead, make decisions, or exert influence, political, on the future direction of conservation and development on this rapidly changing continent. This means that conservation cannot be left to science-driven conservation approaches alone. The impacts, the challenges to conserve wildlife and wildlands are driven by unfolding new African growth trajectory, especially economic and population. Meaning that the next 10 years, if you are involved in conservation, success is going to be less in conservation science, but it's gonna be the social, economic, and political contract and negotiations for wildlife and wildlands, which means that the scale, scope, and the complexity of this economic and social transformation will be such that no sector alone will be able to manage the transformation. It will require conservationists to build strong alliances within governments of Africa and beyond, within the corporate sector, the businesses, the cultural sector as a heritage for the world, for the different skills sets we need to overcome the challenges. And there's so many examples we can talk about, Dimitris, but over back to you and we can continue the discussion.
Thank you, Kaddu. And I mean, you are speaking to the correct audience when we go into the world of business, and the systems are extremely complex within the African continent. And it's also just important to really frame that Africa is not a country. There are 54 nations within Africa that are each individually so diverse and rich and unique. And as Kaddu said, you know, how conservationists have always done it is quite frankly not good enough, because we have landed as to where we are right now. And it really comes down to the partnerships and the collaborations and the co-creations of multiple sectors supporting each other, including the governments themselves. So Kaddu, I think what could be quite an interesting new topic for our audience today is really just, would you mind just framing what is the wildlife economy? And if you wouldn't mind just sharing an example or two around this, just to showcase an explanation into the details. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a phrase really that means that looking at the continent as it is, majority of Africans, more than 90%, their livelihoods are tied in natural resources. But most of that is the exploitation of resources. Most of that is leading to production, but either subsistence or for further markets through the value chains, and that is mostly export. And for many years, that hasn't changed their lives. So the idea, if you're a farmer, you're going to expand your land, you need to produce more. So you need more land. And if you have more sons and daughters, you're going to divide that land into small pieces, and it's not sustainable. But if you are living next to wildlife, so that means that you're going to be fighting for space to share with wildlife or biodiversity as such for your livelihood. And we've seen this. I'll give an example of what now is in the papers of Ngorongoro. For those who have traveled, Ngorongoro is next to Serengeti and Mara National Parks here in Tanzania, and part of the Mara ecosystem with Kenya. What we are seeing there now is the challenge we've had because of the success in the conservation that has happened in the area of Ngorongoro over the last 4 years. The population, which has been an indicator of successful conservation, has increased of all species in this park. And that's congratulations for a lot of the approaches we've used in conservation. But likewise, next door, the neighbors of conservation who are doing their Maasai communities, also, because of improved health and systems, their population also has increased. There's a human species, and their livelihood is cattle. So as the human population increased, the cattle numbers also increased because that is the economy. Looking back now with the approaches we are discussing here at African Wildlife Foundation, we think that if we had done it differently with the wildlife economies, which means that the Maasais were interacted into what we are trying to achieve in conservation, and somehow wildlife in the parks is part of the economy, perhaps they wouldn't care so much in increasing the number of cattle now competing and increasing human-wildlife conflict, because that is the economy. Wildlife is not the economy. The population is increasing because they need more boys to take care of cattle. So the numbers also are increasing. Perhaps if we integrated them into the wildlife economy, maybe that they wouldn't need this huge population. So to you, I wonder, based on your introduction, and I know you, of course, what you are trying to do here, based on your businesses in supporting some of these challenges. I always wonder that if we had earlier on, as a conservation community, really reached out to the business community, reached out to the financial institutions, reached out to private sector of all nature, and said, come and see what we are trying to do here, goals in conservation, and how can we work together to achieve an economy that balances what we need to achieve in conservation and what we need to achieve with our communities living near to these wonderful estates. So from your experience, how could that work? Or would have worked 40 years ago, given the information we have today and the experience?
Yeah, thank you, Kaddu. And, it's really interesting on the side of, conservation has been funded by tourism, and tourism collapsed during COVID, and we saw the repercussions of that, and we still feel that today. But the world of nonprofit is an interesting one. It's a necessity, but the world of implementation run by NGOs to run and put these different models of conservation and community development into the ecosystem is governed and managed by donors and grants and philanthropic money, which means that the money coming into these ecosystems and into these conservation organizations today and historically has meant that everyone wants to protect their solutions. So by everyone protecting their solutions, they're not incentivized to share their successes, their failures with each other. And that's now come where we are today in a very critical stage of humanity and nature, where technology has now stepped into our ecosystem, which didn't exist 40 years ago. I wish we had the capabilities back then, but now there's an interesting timeline of this tech revolution. And when I put my Baotree hat on and we look at these ecosystems, it's really looking at how do we break down these silos and open up an ecosystem where every single conservation organization has the same goal. It's to preserve wildlife and support local indigenous communities. But even today, as you said, when we look at the statistics, 68% of wildlife gone. In the next 30 years, Africa's population is going to double with an average age of 19 years old. So with this population increase, we're going to see a massive mega migration to these cities like Nairobi, Dar es Salaam, Lagos, etc., that don't have the capacity, let alone the opportunity for this massive young workforce that's coming in. So the whole notion that we're looking at from a tech perspective is how do we equip the underserved communities and serve them in a way that replaces, the need to cut down a tree and then use that for charcoal so I can cook and feed my family. And the value of that needs to evolve to keeping a tree alive, which of course the carbon ecosystem and credit economy is taking us to that direction. But again, that's a step towards where we need to go. And now the evolution is taking us towards, how do we start placing a value on wildlife of having an elephant come past my agricultural land and I receive a benefit from that. And therefore almost placing these biodiversity credits, social credits that can connect into the future of technology, which is that world of Web3, blockchain. We're not going to go into the world of crypto today, but really there is this future that's being built. But the challenge or the opportunity is really connecting this future world down to the reality on the ground where community members don't care or need to know about blockchain. But for them, it's how do I get the benefit today? Because I need to feed my family today. And the interface that we're building will really become the glue to manage and support the system, where it also creates a facilitation role for the NGOs rather than doing the implementation themselves. And Kaddu, I don't know if you want to respond to that.
No, I just wanted to, you make a very good point about tourism, because in our life here in Africa, we have been so much dependent on tourism. We actually, as an NGO, pioneered this idea of ecotourism on the continent. But rightly so, as you said, COVID has also showed us that you really can't rely on tourism alone. There are so many other things. And we've tried other approaches. We carry out conservation enterprises within these communities. Some of the challenges we have faced, and I would like also to hear more how you could help with this, is that we are now trying to, we've been so successful in developing enterprises, what we call conservation enterprises, whether it's in agriculture, we train communities around chili growing, we do avocados for export, we do tea, conservation tea with communities. The challenge has been for us is that we've been doing it at small scale. We are working with 120 households. We've been so successful. We have very good stories where these households are now supporters of conservation. Poaching has gone down in many of their areas. They take care of wildlife as they take care of their goats and cows. But how do we scale this up? You talked about the blockchain, you talked about what technology can do, but how do we, I would like to hear more on the value chain. What can we use? And this is back to the wildlife economies. The example of our program in Rwanda. Right now, we've been so successful in Rwanda with the mountain gorillas, working closely with the government and other players there. For 40 years, no mountain gorilla has been poached. because we've connected together with the government tourism to the economy, rural economies of these areas, and people see exact benefit. But it's the highly dense populated area in Africa. We cannot continue. We've been successful the last 40 years, but we cannot continue saying that we are successful when the population has increased. How do we extend these benefits to these communities? Currently, the government receives about $360 million from this industry. Communities receive about 21% of that revenue back into their communities. But we know it's not enough. How do we bottle this experience? People pay for $1,500 per hour and share it and expand that pie so that it benefits a larger number of people. How can we do it so quickly? Because of the demand of the resources is now. How can we do it at scale? We must do it. What can we employ in that regard? The population, because of the success, again, like in Ngorongoro, the population of mountain gorillas has increased, and it requires expansion of the park. And that's what we are trying to do now with the government of Rwanda. What economy can we introduce in these areas so that the park can be expanded? The communities depend on some of the economies that support conservation and the habitat of the mountain gorillas. We talked, for example, about the bamboo economy in these areas, supporting communities to be engaged in bamboo, because that's the food of the mountain gorillas. But also you can make a chair from bamboo. You can make a toothbrush from bamboo. You can make a shirt from bamboo. It's a construction material. So if the population picks that economy, we can expand the park because they're growing bamboo instead of sisal and cassava and poreros. They are now growing. The park will expand. The economy, bamboo will expand. But the question we have now, how do you ensure that the chair made through this process has a value in New York, in Amsterdam, and London, different from any other chair, so that the communities here don't have to make 1,000 chairs, which means cutting all the bamboo they've grown to sell a chair for $1. From what you explained before, how can you practically apply some of the technology, whether it's technology, whether it's just IT, whether it's marketing, whether it's connecting people to people? How technology help? How could business help?
Thank you, Kaddu. And really, to come back to first principles, as my good friend Pav on the call always says, why do we do what we do as humans? We are all driven by incentive, be it on social media, where we post something to get more likes and receive this endorphin hit. Given, to cut down the tree to feed my family, I got an incentive of immediate selling the charcoal, there's remuneration. And these incentive mechanisms are what can be driven at scale. And that's thanks to these devices. So now with smartphone penetration rates going through the roof, a very young tech-savvy ecosystem coming up, these youngsters don't necessarily want to be getting dirty and muddy doing agriculture. They want to be doing something sexy, working with technology. And it's looking at how do we gamify almost the real world through data collection. And that data is a commodity, which is more valuable than oil today. So how do they have the opportunity to transact that data to an organization like AWF, like Rwandan Development Board, like the IUCN or government organizations, in a way that goes directly to that individual? Because like you said, and just to share some data points you previously shared with me, I mean, just to go back to that Rwandan model, which is an incredible success story for conservation, as Kaddu said, and I had the pleasure of doing this last year, going to one of these reserves or volcanic national parks to see the gorillas for 1 hour, it's $1,500. But then to stay at the hotel next to these conservation areas, it's nearly $8,000 per day. So there's a huge discrepancy of what goes to nature versus what goes to the tourism industry, which is, of course, both needed. But as you said, Kaddu, the trick now is how do we bottle these experiences in a way that expands and expounds that 1 hour experience, where people can take it home with them, people can share it with them. And again, technology provides the capacity for video, for information, for real-time monitoring, to actually continue the experience even when that person does go back to Amsterdam, London, or New York. So it's really looking at how do we go, and look at the models that currently exist and just scale them in a way that's sustainable. And then part of that, Kaddu, I just want to put a question back to you, which just takes us into a slightly different topic. I guess 2 words will help us go into that. It's paperwork. And paperwork is something that is so outdated and old, and it's a part of our challenge as Baotree, where there's so much resistance to trying a new thing, a new technology, because we've always done it this way. And so can you just talk a little bit around that, old to new system evolution that we need to do, and part of the challenges that this capturing of information through paper actually puts into this ecosystem of conservation?
Yeah, we've been talking about with some companies, that's really the challenge of really getting resources where they are needed through the market system. And we've been asking questions on how do we turn the interest and the power we've seen of internet, for example, so that it's not just a marketing tool. A lot of us who are in conservation or in other development sectors, we've seen the power of internet, but we only see it as a power of supporting resource extraction. The power of internet supporting purchasing that, or demands or consumerism. We haven't seen the power of internet on how it can support, like you described previously, somebody in Rwanda or Botswana or Mozambique to connect directly to somebody who can give value to an item down and cut out all this paperwork. One of the things we've seen bottlenecks with a lot of the paperwork in the value chain is, quite frankly, on this continent and perhaps elsewhere, is corruption and bureaucracy. I really think that the more technology will help us reduce the paper in any transaction and put information in public space, we are going to reduce corruption as one thing. Definitely, we are going to reduce the bureaucracy, the time it takes for someone to find an item, where it is, purchase it, and the money reaching the producer in these rural areas and rural economies where we really need to develop these rural economies. The other thing it does to reduce this paper is really connecting somebody who is buying something from the rural economies that we need to support, that support conservation, to tie to a consumer anywhere in the world, so that there is a relationship with a community which is producing, or a household producing something somebody is consuming. What that does is what here in Africa we call Ubuntu. In all African languages, you are because I am. Then you start caring about someone who has produced your cup and not the outlet where you got it from. That information, if we can get it away from the paper, financial institutions can also be helped by cutting down that transactional costs in reaching the rural. I'm more concerned about the rural economies that need to support wildlife conservation.
Yeah. And I mean, Kaddu, yeah, pen and paper, it's got so many issues, from human error to corruption to, a lot of times, how the system is currently governed. It's a very top-down approach, where you almost have the Western Eastern world trying to save Africa and provide aid to the continent, rather than doing a bottom-up approach and listening to what's truly happening between biodiversity and community, and looking at how do we start to implement solutions that are, transparent and accountable, but drive, as you keep going back to, that economic value, where it can go into supply chain transparency, starting with bamboo farming around gorillas. It's a local food source and a very strong material, as well as, showcasing that Africa is also an extremely attractive investment opportunity, which is, as a leader on this continent, Kaddu, what would you say to YPO members around removing this fear of investing on the continent? And, how do we start to showcase the opportunities that actually sit here? Because as an entrepreneur based in Kenya, there's so many cool things going on, but there's such a big financial gap of supporting these young entrepreneurs and startup entities that are working to save biodiversity and local communities. So yeah, what would you say to the YPO folks on that?
I think it's going to be people to people. It's going to be increasing the understanding of what Africa is and what Africa means actually to the rest of the world. You touched it earlier, that Africa is not a country. So what's happening in Ethiopia is different from what's happening in Kenya. And these are neighbors. The economies are different. The setup is different. The wars or peace going on in different countries doesn't really mean that you really can't do business in one country or another. But I think the common thing for those who care about the issue we are discussing in YPO, and I know you do, is this idea that Africa right now, as I see it, is at a crossroad. Africa is making a decision today, and in the next 5 years, definitely less than 10, these decisions are going to determine the continent the rest of the world will have. And why does that matter? It's because we are the last frontier. Africa has the last biodiversity sink banks for the rest of the world. Africa has more than a third of the fresh water in this world. Africa today has about 1.2 billion people. In the next 20 plus years, Africa is going to have about 2+ billion people, more than China and India. What that means, it's going to be the youngest population in the world. It is predicted by the World Bank that in 30 to 50 years, 4 out of 10 young people are going to be Africans. So the choice for us is, what are we going to do with 4 out of 10 young Africans if they're not employed? If they have no hope? What are we going to do if biodiversity is impacted when Africa has the second land for the rest of the world, but also the country like DRC consumes more carbon out of the atmosphere than any other country in the world because of the natures of the trees? If those kids in DRC continue to be poor, this is going to impact any program that Europe, North America, or any Asian country is put in place right now to address climate change. So Africa is part of the solution. The opportunities are that Africa lacks about 70% of the technology we need for development. How can we get engaged? What a business opportunity and an impact investment to come and frog leap the continent to a place where it's adaptive to climate. It's easier for Africa than Europe to change our way of life because we're just at the beginning. How do we fix that? Actually, Africa can be a model for the economies that we are trying to develop in Europe and North America. Because Europe, it's hard. North America, where it is, we are asking people of European people and North Americans to change the way they live. We are asking Africans to adopt a new mode of life. It's easier here to do that. And we want a big part of that, and it's part of the solution to the rest of the world. There are so many opportunities. The young people who are 70% of this continent are the most educated Africans you ever have. It's going to be a huge force in labor force in the world. I know some companies already here trying to to take advantage of this. So there are business opportunities, but impact investment too.
Thank you, Kaddu. And I'm just going to now move us through to a bit of an open Q&A session. And Lavi, you're welcome to just unmute individuals. But I've seen a common thread or question come through from both Florian and Randall, which is really looking at, one topic being poaching. The second is hunting. How do you perceive hunting as a conservation solution? Do you believe in it? Do you feel it's a long-term solution? And yeah, what are your thoughts around that?
Hunting is part of the solutions for conservation. Hunting is one of the tools in the box we need to solve some of the challenges we are faced with. It's not working right now because it's not doing the right way. Some areas where there are areas where it's working. But here is the challenge we have as far as hunting is concerned. There are areas that are rich with wildlife, mostly buffers of many of the protected areas, that there is no any other economy in these areas that you can develop to sustain land use. Conservation is a land use. So in areas like countries like Zimbabwe, countries like Tanzania, we've seen those examples where hunting trophies was banned in Tanzania, and Tanzania lost government started discussing on reversing these conservation protected areas into agricultural areas because they were not contributing anything to the economies. They became wastelands because the revenue stream from hunting was cut off, and there was no any other economic activity you could do with these areas hosting wildlife other than perhaps building a wall around them so that other people cannot find an alternative land use for these areas, which is practically impossible. We've tried that in our approaches as conservationists, training rangers, giving them guns, putting them in military uniforms, giving them helicopter gunshots. It hasn't stopped the killing. So hunting, we need to fix it. There are many, many issues involved in hunting that needs to be fixed, but it's part of the tools we need for conservation.
And yeah, Kaddu, thank you. It's really been quite a sensitive topic because I don't believe in killing. And it's sad that killing has to be a solution in today's world. And as you said, with more anti-poaching units, more electric fences, more fighting hate with hate, it's sad that this has to be one of those solutions, but I understand that it does drive economic value. But I believe that there are solutions coming up to almost replace hunting as a solution because, yeah, it's just.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched it. The solution is not banning hunting because right now it's the economy in many of these areas. The solution is in what are the alternative economies? And we touched on that in our previous discussions. Until those options are provided, you shut down hunting, you're killing more wildlife than the hunters would.
Yeah.
For now.
Yeah, for now. And then a question has come through from Pav, which is, Kaddu, in your opinion, what are the industries and sectors that are currently having the most negative impact on Africa's wildlife? And second to that, what is it about these industries that needs to change in order to mitigate their negative impact?
That's a difficult question in a sense that it's majority, I could say majority of the industry here, whether it's the extractive industries, having a bad impacts on environment and wildlife. But that's the simplest way. I can easily say that and walk away, but that is not really the issue. The issue is the systems that are in place that are not addressing the issues that these industries, the same industries that are operating in North America, are the same industries working here. But here they are managed in a wrong way. They are monitored wrongly. They are regulated wrongly. they invest badly, they hire badly, and then it's so easy for us to say, oh, it's the mining industry that is bad. That is populist. Yes, there are two answers here. The mining industry is not doing a great job, but I can also describe some of the tourism industries that are not. So the issue here is really the mechanics of what's going on. We've worked with some industries that have been so bad, and we've fixed the problem by not stopping what the industries are doing, but making them part of the solutions to their bottom lines, and working with them to understand that they have a stake here. They also have a stakeholder. It hurts their business, and there's another way of achieving their business goals and by continuing doing the business. So overall, there's so many other businesses. The infrastructure business has huge implications, but it's not so much about the infrastructure around the energy. It's the choice of the energy.
Yeah. Thank you, Kaddu. And I guess just to step us into that system a little bit more, really, what's quite sad and what I've been seeing is that, sometimes the solution is perceived, and this is a personal opinion, that the answer to solving and preserving our wild spaces is actually to buy and buy and buy land and remove local people off that land, which is totally incorrect. It's exploitatory, and it almost removes the dignification of these individuals who have maybe a couple of acres of land, and a foreign entity comes and says, we're going to offer you $2,000 for this land, not really as a local individual knowing what the true value of that ecosystem is. And then they're removed, come to Nairobi, go straight into one of the slums thinking there's potential opportunity, and they come and then there's no water, sanitation, opportunity, anything. So it's, again, a big part of that corruption and the human error that comes in.
It's really, we call it kicking the can. You come and buy land for conservation. You are really pushing the people on the edge. They will come back. Every piece of land in Africa is owned by someone else, whether they have a certificate or land title or not. So there's a claim to that land. It's a matter of a different political system that's going to empower them to claim that land back. But just briefly, give you an example of exactly what you just described from our work in southern Tanzania, where, and I won't name the companies, but we worked with a sugar production company there, which came in exactly with the approach you just described. Invested in sugar, bought land, grew sugar canes for their factories, and pushed everybody on the edge. And they had very angry neighbors. We moved in, and the neighbors moved to the corridors where elephants were passing. Elephants started squeezing themselves and started damaging the sugar canes the companies had. So we came in and told the company that, look, you can do this differently. Your job is to produce sugar. Why are you growing sugar canes? Why are you buying land to grow sugar canes? We have a formula here. Why don't you empower people, train them, give them the skills to grow the sugar canes, extension farmers. Let them grow the sugar canes, buy sugar canes from them. And by the way we are doing it, sugar cane consumes a lot of water. Do you know where your water comes from? We showed them their computer model, and it comes out that their water comes underground, but the source is more than 100 miles away from the sugar company. We told him that if you are investing here for another 40 years or 50 years, you won't have water unless you invest in conserving a forest that is more than 100 miles away. The company now has an agreement on an ecosystem service by providing services to the communities which is far away, education, so that people cannot rely on charcoal to generate revenue to pay school fees. They're investing in education. They're investing in proper agricultural services in order to protect that forest that feeds their sugar. Yeah. So it's a win-win. And now what they found themselves in a situation where it's cheaper for them to produce sugar because they don't have many employers who are growing sugar. The communities have taken care of that. They're not having so many drivers. The communities deliver the sugar. So they are in their core business of producing and marketing sugar. It's a win-win situation. So it's for the previous question, I could have told you 6 years ago, before we had a conversation with the sugar company, that one of the industries that's damaging wildlife is sugar, but sugar companies. But that's not the case now, because we fixed that problem. The elephants have their corridor, the communities have their incomes by growing sugar cane. The company still exports sugar. It's one of the largest sugar exporters in Tanzania.
Yeah. Thank you, Kaddu. That's such a positive story to conservation. And just also share a little bit around, I guess the vision of where we see ourselves going, firstly, just as a technology company, is to build some context. I mean, I think some of us are mostly familiar with an NFT, a non-fungible token, which is usually utilized in the world of art. And that art is purchased at a particular value. And this NFT is a store of value in this blockchain ecosystem. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is because the more the art increases in value is down to the impressions, the likes, and the consistent purchases of that art piece. Now, what I perceive as the future for conservation and sustainable ecosystems is really looking at Mother Nature is our art. How do we NFT an entire landscape? And within that, Kaddu, like you said, there's agriculture, there's animal corridors, there's education, there's social development. There's all these different components that need to be run and governed from a bottom-up approach. So with our technology, and something that, Kaddu, we're very early stages in this discussion, but is really looking at, how do we NFT a landscape and have the individual community members as having this ownership on that land that is co-created and co-data manufactured, where carbon credits is one ecosystem of value, but it's now also creating education credits. It's creating biodiversity credits. It's creating social credits. And these credits are what would float up into this blockchain Web3 ecosystem. And the financial instrument is what would remunerate the community members on the ground to complete these positive actions, where it is positive regenerative agriculture, or it's restoration of erosion, or it's the removal of invasive species, or it's hosting an elephant around your agriculture space. But now what's amazing here is that the community earns that financial backing directly to themselves without those corruptive ecosystems and human error spaces, where it goes straight to the individual, which is monitored by AI, via smart contracts and data machine learning that can just inform what information is needed to inflate the value of that land in that particular ecosystem. So it's quite an interesting space. And yeah.
I like that. I would like to explore that further, because as you are talking, I was seeing how that can really happen on the ground, because right now the only way someone can pay medical bill is produce something and sell it. And if your bill is higher, you need to produce 4 or 5. If it's a healthy bill, if it's for your husband, you're gonna sell 2 goats. If your daughter falls sick, then you need 5 goats. And that's what happened with the Maasai and Ngorongoro equation. So how can we repackage that arrangement and create these levels of credit that actually is from their experiences, from their contribution, that really gives you credit to a school, gives to education, credit to, I would like to explore that further, because it will really, it's this question we are trying to ask: how do we move from GDP measure as an economic growth? And that's a challenge a lot of the biodiversity-rich countries African leaders I deal with are asking me, if I have a forest, I can't grow my economy by just having a forest, but I can grow my economy by selling timber or cutting down and grow cocoa for chocolate.
Yeah.
How do we give rewards at a household level, but also at a national level? Because currently in the current economic system, it's difficult. And there are issues around the carbon too, carbon trade, which is now one of the solutions to that.
Yeah.
But there are so many other, challenges with that too.
Thank you, Kaddu. And that's, I guess, where we blare incentive with scaling behavioral change, and that will drive that economic growth. And so I'm just going to round up with a couple of call to actions. And Kaddu, please feel free to add on to this. But really, as we've seen and explored today, I mean, we need more business minds, new ways of working, and the connection of minds and each other, because this is not a one person or one organization solution. And more importantly, another call to action, especially to the YNGers on this call, is we need that youth engagement and that multi-generational dialogue and collaboration that will take us towards action. And then the last point is also looking at, we need new technologies. We need the private sector, new ways of unlocking capital for this wildlife economy to preserve these beautiful African savannas. And if you haven't visited Kenya or Africa, we strongly encourage you to. And Kaddu, from the bottom of my heart and the rest of the YPO community, thank you so much. Your passion is organic, it's infectious. Everything you're doing for our continent, I'm personally and collectively so grateful. And I really find it an honor and a privilege to be able to share and hold this space with you, talking about these things that we just so deeply love and that we need to work on together. So thank you so much. And I don't know if you have any final closing remarks.
Really, just to thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed this, and thanks for our listeners and anyone who's going to pick this up online. Like you said, these wonderful savannas, these wonderful forestry ecosystems, with these wonderful riverbeds that Hemingway describes in so many ways. The next future Hemingways are going to be business people who are going to support sustainability of these wonderful futures that Africa are holding for the rest of the world, for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. After all, this is home. We are all Africans. Was the beginning of our start as a human species. So let's come home and see how this continent can try to fix the global challenges. So thanks a lot for the opportunity, and thanks to our listeners.
Thank you, Kaddu, and happy Earth Day again to everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and have a happy weekend.